George Washington. George Washington is well known for his involvement in the French and Indian War, as well as leading the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War, which resulted in the United States gaining independence from Great Britain. He presided over the Constitutional Convention, where the U.S. Constitution began to take shape, and he established the federal court system separate from state courts. He also played a key role in introducing the Bill of Rights, which provided explicit guarantees of personal freedoms and rights, while also limiting the government's power. Washington signed the Jay Treaty, which helped stabilize trade relations with Great Britain, and issued the Proclamation of Neutrality to keep the United States neutral in European conflicts. He chose the title Mr. President and retired in 1797. John Adams. John Adams, the first Vice President of the United States, made significant contributions by successfully defending British soldiers involved in the Boston Massacre and appointing John Marshall, a highly influential figure, to the Supreme Court. Adams kept the nation out of war with France and peacefully transferred power to his political rival, Thomas Jefferson. Despite these accomplishments, he faced criticism due to the Alien and Sedition Acts, which he signed into law. These included the Naturalization Act, which made it more difficult to become a citizen, the Alien Friends Act, which allowed the president to imprison and deport non-citizens, the Alien Enemies Act, which granted the president additional authority to detain non-citizens during wartime, and the Sedition Act, which criminalized false and malicious statements against the federal government. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is most notable for the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the United States. He played a leading role in the 1776 Revolution and was a key figure in drafting the Declaration of Independence. During his presidency, Jefferson focused on reducing the national debt and limiting the size of the federal government by cutting military expenses and lowering taxes. His presidency was not without its challenges, as he faced backlash for the Embargo Act of 1807, which hurt American merchants by halting trade with Europe during the Napoleonic Wars. James Madison. James Madison, often referred to as the father of the Constitution, was instrumental in drafting and promoting the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, while also helping to establish the federal system. As president, he continued the Democratic-Republican approach of reducing the strength of the federal government and maintaining a small military. He led the country through the War of 1812 against Great Britain, which was triggered by British attacks on American merchant ships. Despite initial setbacks, such as the burning of Washington, D.C. in 1814 and threats from some New England states to leave the Union, the war ultimately bolstered national pride and solidified the government's legitimacy, ending with a peace treaty. Madison also oversaw the establishment of the Second Bank of the United States and the beginning of the era of good feelings. James Monroe. James Monroe served as president during a period known as the era of good feelings, marked by the collapse of the Federalist Party, leaving the Democratic-Republican Party without opposition, and by increased national pride. Monroe is perhaps best known for the Monroe Doctrine, declared in 1823, which warned European nations not to interfere in or colonize the Americas, thereby asserting U.S. influence in the Western Hemisphere. John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was a strong proponent of significant federal investment in infrastructure, such as roads and canals, as part of the American system. He also advocated for civil liberties and education reform. However, his presidency was overshadowed by the controversy of the corrupt bargain, in which Adams secured his presidency with the support of Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House, whom he then appointed as Secretary of State, leading to accusations of a rigged deal. Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson saw himself as a representative of the common people and was known for his strong personality. When an assassination attempt was made on his life, he famously beat the attacker with his cane. Jackson is remembered for the Indian Removal Act, which led to the forced relocation of Native American tribes, resulting in the tragic Trail of Tears. He also achieved a major victory against the British in the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren was the first president born as a U.S. citizen and played a key role in building the Democratic Party. His presidency took place during the Panic of 1837, an economic depression that he inherited from the policies of the Jackson administration. Van Buren's response, which involved maintaining Jackson's hard money policies, was unpopular and ineffective in stopping the economic downturn. He also opposed the annexation of Texas, as he believed it would upset the balance between slave and free states. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison holds the record for the shortest presidency in American history, serving only 31 days in 1841 before dying of pneumonia. He is primarily remembered for his military victories against Native American forces, particularly at the Battle of Tippecanoe. His death underscored the importance of establishing a clear line of presidential succession, which eventually led to changes in the U.S. Constitution. John Tyler. John Tyler was the first vice president to ascend to the presidency following the death of his predecessor. His most notable accomplishment was the annexation of Texas in 1845, which contributed to the tensions that eventually led to the Mexican-American War. Tyler faced substantial opposition from his own party, and after he vetoed a bill to create a new national bank, he was expelled, becoming the only president without a party affiliation after George Washington. James Polk. James Polk is recognized for his effective leadership during the Mexican-American War, which resulted in the United States expanding westward, gaining territories including parts of New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, California, Texas, and western Colorado. He also resolved the Oregon boundary dispute with Britain. The acquisition of these new territories raised the contentious issue of whether they would allow slavery, with Northerners favoring free territories and Southerners favoring slave territories. Polk chose not to address this issue, leaving it for his successors. Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor was a career military officer before becoming president. His short presidency was dominated by the unresolved issues left by Polk regarding the newly acquired territories from the Mexican-American War. With tensions rising between slave and free states, Taylor, despite being a slave owner, worked to preserve the Union by pushing for California's admission as a free state and the establishment of new territories where the question of slavery could be decided later. Millard Filmore. Millard Filmore is primarily remembered for signing the Compromise of 1850, which attempted to ease tensions between the North and South, but ended up alienating both sides. The compromise included the Fugitive Slave Act, which required the return of escaped slaves to their owners even in free states, making it highly controversial. As a result of his support for the compromise, Filmore was not nominated for the 1852 presidential election. Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce's presidency is notable for his support of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which allowed settlers in those territories to decide whether to permit slavery, effectively repealing the Missouri Compromise. This led to violent conflict in Kansas between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers, known as Bleeding Kansas. Pierce's policies are often criticized for contributing to the onset of the American Civil War. James Buchanan. James Buchanan is often considered one of the least effective presidents due to his inability to prevent the Southern states from seceding from the Union. During his presidency, the Dred Scott decision was issued, ruling that Congress could not prohibit slavery in the territories, further polarizing the nation. Buchanan believed that the Constitution protected slavery and was strongly opposed to the abolitionist movement. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, the first president from the modern Republican Party, is best known for leading the United States through the Civil War. He played a crucial role in preserving the Union and addressing the issue of slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation and the passage of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, shortly after the Civil War ended. Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson's presidency was defined by his disputes with Congress over how to reintegrate Southern states into the Union. His frequent vetoes of congressional legislation, often overridden by Congress, led to significant tension. These conflicts reached their peak when Johnson violated the Tenure of Office Act, a law that prevented the president from removing civil officers without Senate approval, by dismissing a government official, which led to his impeachment. Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant is best remembered for his efforts to protect the civil rights of African Americans during Reconstruction. He supported the passage of the 15th Amendment, granting African Americans the right to vote, and his administration actively worked against the Ku Klux Klan, enforcing civil rights laws in the South. Grant's presidency, however, was marred by numerous scandals and widespread corruption, though he was not personally implicated. His foreign policy achievements included the Treaty of Washington, which resolved border disputes and claims between the U.S. and Great Britain. Rutherford Hayes. Rutherford Hayes ended Reconstruction through the Compromise of 1877, which resolved the disputed 1876 election in his favor in exchange for withdrawing federal troops from the South. This effectively ended the enforcement of civil rights protections for African Americans in the South, leading to the establishment of Jim Crow laws that institutionalized racial segregation. James Garfield. James Garfield's presidency was tragically cut short after just 200 days when he was assassinated. Despite his brief time in office, Garfield strongly advocated for civil service reform and worked to advance education rights for African Americans. He sought to prevent corruption in government hiring practices, though his assassination interrupted his efforts. Chester Arthur. Chester Arthur, initially viewed with skepticism due to his history of securing political appointments through patronage, surprised many by championing civil service reform. During his presidency, the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act was passed, establishing that government jobs should be awarded based on merit rather than political connections. Arthur also focused on modernizing the U.S. Navy and reforming the tariff system. Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland is the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. During his second term, he faced an economic depression and resisted calls to inflate the currency, instead advocating for the gold standard. Cleveland also opposed high tariffs, Civil War veterans' pensions, and fought against corruption and patronage in government. His decision to use federal troops to break the Pullman strike drew criticism from labor unions. Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison is known for signing the Sherman Antitrust Act, a landmark law aimed at curbing monopolies and promoting economic competition. During his presidency, 6 new states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Washington, Idaho, and Wyoming, were admitted to the Union, the most of any presidency. Harrison supported high protective tariffs through the McKinley Tariff, which increased duties on foreign goods to support American industry, and expanded the federal money supply to help farmers struggling with debt. However, these policies led to economic downturns. That's all for the first 23 presidents of the United States, each shaping the nation's early history in unique ways. Join us in Part 2, where we continue our journey through the next chapters of American leadership and explore the pivotal moments under the next presidents.